He only wanted to do his job, quietly, respectfully, with the kind of dignity most people never even notice. But that night, inside a glittering room filled with wealth and power, his very existence became the punchline of a cruel joke. The laughter was loud, sharp, and cutting, echoing through the walls like a reminder that some people still believe respect is something you earn only by the color of your skin. What none of them expected, however, was that the man they mocked wasn't powerless, and the truth he carried would silence the room in a way no one saw coming. How does a single moment flip the balance of power and expose the prejudice still hiding in plain sight? Marcus was the kind of man who blended into the background, not because he lacked ambition, but because he carried himself with quiet humility. He worked long shifts at a luxury hotel, always the first to greet guests with a smile, always the last to leave after making sure every table was spotless. To him, dignity came from hard work, and respect was something you offered freely, whether or not it was ever returned. Outside of work, life was simple. He sent money home to help his mother, joked with his younger sister on late night calls, and dreamed of one day opening a small cafe of his own. There was nothing extraordinary about his routine, yet that was what made it so easy to underestimate him. That evening, when he put on his crisp uniform and adjusted his name tag in the mirror, Marcus had no reason to believe the night would be any different. Another event, another room filled with expensive suits and clinking glasses. Another evening of serving without being truly seen, but beneath the glitter of chandeliers and polished marble floors, something far uglier was waiting. He couldn't know it yet, but before the night was over, Marcus would no longer be invisible. He would be forced into the spotlight, not by choice, but by cruelty. And the way he responded would leave a room full of powerful men stunned into silence. The ballroom shimmered with wealth. Golden chandeliers cast warm light across the tables, where laughter mingled with the sound of crystal glasses clinking in celebration. Marcus moved swiftly but carefully between the guests, balancing trays heavy with champagne. To most in that room, he wasn't Marcus. He was simply the waiter, a figure meant to fade into the background. And that was fine. He had learnt long ago that invisibility often felt safer than being noticed. But as the night wore on, something shifted. A group of men, seated near the head table, had begun to watch him a little too closely. Their eyes followed his every step, not with appreciation, but with the casual cruelty of people who thought the world was theirs. Among them sat a man whose presence seemed to command the entire room. A Chinese billionaire, a guest of honor, his reputation whispered with awe and envy. The others leaned toward him, eager to laugh at his jokes, eager to bask in his approval. When Marcus placed a glass at their table, the billionaire smirked. His voice carried just loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. A comment slipped from his lips, mocking Marcus's appearance, his skin, his very place in that room. The words weren't subtle. They weren't meant to be. They were daggers wrapped in humor, thrown with the confidence of a man who believed no one would ever challenge him. The table erupted with laughter. Expensive suits shook as men doubled over, slapping each other on the back, their mirth bouncing off the walls. Marcus stood frozen, the tray still in his hands, the champagne trembling inside its glass stem. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to swallow the sting, to disappear into the blur of waiters rushing about. That was what he had always done. But this time the sting cut deeper. This wasn't just an insult. It was humiliation crafted for an audience. He lowered his eyes, forcing himself to breathe, and walked away. But the sound of their laughter followed him across the ballroom like a shadow. He tried to focus on the work, collecting plates, serving dishes. But each step felt heavier. each moment dragged down by the weight of those words. He could feel the stares of other guests, some curious, some uncomfortable, and most pretending not to notice. 6 minutes passed, then another round of service, and again he had to return to their table. His palms were slick with sweat as he approached, tray balanced carefully, heart pounding in his chest. He hoped, prayed, that the moment had passed, but the billionaire wasn't finished. This time, the insult came sharper and crueler, the punchline crafted to remind Marcus of where he stood in their world. The laughter returned, louder than before, as if the whole table had been waiting for this encore. Something inside Marcus cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but deep within, where years of swallowed pride and buried anger lived. He forced his face into neutrality, but his hands tightened against the tray until his knuckles whitened. He knew he was standing at a crossroads. Endure the humiliation yet again, or find a way, any way, to push back. The room, glittering and beautiful on the surface, suddenly felt suffocating. Every laugh was another nail pressing against his chest. Every dismissive glance was a reminder of the divide between servant and served. And yet, within that divide, Marcus felt a strange clarity begin to rise. He could not change who he was. He could not silence the prejudice that lingered in their hearts. But in that moment, he realized he could take something back, his dignity, his voice, his power. And as he steadied himself, preparing for the moment that would come next, no one in that ballroom, least of all the billionaire, had any idea what Marcus was about to do. The second round of laughter cut deeper than the first. Marcus felt his chest tighten, his throat dry, and every instinct screaming at him to retreat. But something in him refused. He had spent years bowing his head, shrinking himself to fit into the corners of rooms that were never meant to welcome him. Not tonight. The tray trembled in his grip as he set it down. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with arrogance, already preparing his next punchline. And then Marcus spoke. His voice, calm but firm, carried across the table. First, no one understood. The words were unfamiliar, sharp, and melodic. The laughter faltered. Heads turned. And then realization rippled through the group. Marcus was speaking in flawless Mandarin. The billionaire's smirk collapsed into stunned silence. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't curse. Instead, he mirrored the very cruelty that had been hurled at him, translating every insult back into the man's own language, stripping away the shield of humor and exposing its ugliness for what it truly was. Each word landed heavier than the last, not because they were new, but because they came from a man the billionaire had dismissed as invisible. Around the table, the shift was immediate. The laughter evaporated, replaced by uneasy silence. Guests stared, caught between disbelief and shame. Some lowered their eyes, no longer able to pretend they hadn't heard. Others exchanged glances, as if silently questioning how they could have joined in the cruelty just moments before. The billionaire opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came. For the first time that evening, the man who owned the room no longer controlled it. Marcus did. His heart pounded as he finished, his breath sharp, his body trembling with the force of years of swallowed pride finally breaking free. He didn't slam the tray down. He didn't storm away. He simply stood tall, his silence afterward heavier than the chandelier above their heads. And in that silence, the truth became impossible to ignore. Power does not always belong to the loudest voice. In the room, what Marcus had done wasn't just defiance, it was reclamation. The question lingering in the stunned air was not whether they had heard him, but whether they would ever forget the moment they laughed at a man who refused to stay silent. The silence in the ballroom lingered long. After Marcus walked away, He didn't storm out or demand an apology. He simply returned to his duties, moving quietly through the glittering hall as if nothing had happened. Yet nothing was the same. Every guest who had witnessed the exchange carried the weight of it in their eyes. The billionaire, once so loud and untouchable, now sat in uneasy stillness, his power momentarily stripped away by a man he believed beneath him. For Marcus, the night continued as it always did, serving plates, clearing glasses, and thanking guests who barely acknowledged him. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not because of what he endured, but because he refused to bow under it. The humiliation was real, but so was the dignity he reclaimed. When he finally hung up his uniform that night, Marcus stood taller in the mirror. The reflection staring back at him wasn't just a waiter or a man mocked in front of strangers. It was someone who had chosen courage over silence, dignity over shame. He knew the memory of that night would follow him, but not as a wound. It would follow him as proof that even in the smallest moments, resistance can echo louder than cruelty. But Marcus's story is not his alone. His experience is part of a larger truth, one that millions know too well. Racism rarely appears in grand gestures. It hides in laughter, in jokes, and in the dismissive looks and careless words that cut deeper than most realize. It thrives in rooms where cruelty feels safe, where power is measured not by integrity, but by the ability to belittle. And yet Marcus showed something vital. Racism may wound, but it cannot define. His response did not erase the injustice, but it revealed a different kind of strength, the kind that forces people to confront their own complicity, to question the comfort of their silence. The impact of that moment was more than humiliation turned back on the one who dealt it. It was a reminder that racism doesn't just belong to history books or protests on the streets. It lives in everyday encounters, in the spaces where we work, eat, and gather. And it will continue to live there until enough people decide to no longer look away. So the question lingers for all of us. When cruelty parades as humor, when prejudice hides in plain sight, will we laugh along? Or will we choose the harder path, standing up, speaking out, and refusing to let silence protect injustice? Because Marcus's story may have ended that night, but the larger story is still being written. And what happens next depends not just on those who suffer, but on those who choose to witness. Will we stay quiet, or finally listen